Rebecca, who founded the Ferm, which is a kimchi brand, she grew up loving kimchi in her home country. It was part of her community, part of her family. It was part of her life. She moved to England at some point, and kimchi at school was mocked in the UK. It wasn't really understood. It has a very particular smell, and she almost felt shame for eating it. But then roll forward the years, she now has a kimchi brand, and I think kimchi is going to be one of the next big food trends for sure. So to think about where she's come from, it being so intertwined with her upbringing, that period where it wasn't particularly looked upon in a good light in the UK when she was growing up, to now having a brand that so many people love. In addition to why she started it, she also wanted to stay in the UK to have a visa, an entrepreneurial visa. She had to start a brand. So it's those two components I feel that led to her starting the firm. So the fact it's such an emotional story, but how did she create the company as well is something that I really wanted to get to the bottom of, and why she very kindly came on the podcast. So Rebecca, thank you for your time. I'm excited for you all to hear. So without further ado, are you sitting comfortably? If so, we shall begin. Let's get on with it. Roll the credits.
Being a founder is a lifestyle. You are constantly underpaid, if you're paid at all, and overworked. You don't have really boundaries in your personal life. Oh my God, I'm gonna have to run a business. I have no idea how to do this. No one in my family has done business before. And now my whole day is about chasing people and following up emails and calls. You just need to be really persistent, and you learn to be that way.
But no, Rebecca, it's great to have you finally on. I think we spoke, a couple of weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago?
Yes. Yeah, we did. Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to kind of go in more depth about what we already
Yeah, I must admit, I left that conversation. I felt embarrassed is the wrong word, but usually I've at least tried, or I know of really specifically what the product is when I speak to a founder. I've obviously heard of kimchi, but I've never tasted it, and it's still embarrassing now because we've got the episode coming up, like we're recording right now, and I still haven't tasted it. But I must admit, it looks like, people might think I'm just saying this for the sake of it. It looks so good though on your website, and after this, I'm going to order some because it looks delicious.
Thank you. Appreciate it. No, but it's okay because it is a niche market. It's kind of an emerging product slash culture as well. So completely understand. I do have a lot of customers who come up to me and say they've never heard of it, or they've heard of it and they haven't tried it. So you're not alone there in the
My
journey
gosh.
at all.
But that's quite exciting in a way, because it's something people, don't necessarily encounter in their day to day. But you also have another product, which, for the benefit of our audience, I was slightly practicing the pronunciation before this, which is Chi. Is that right?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's perfect. Tangachi is not well known at all. I always kind of explain it as kimchi's cousin. It's basically another type of ferment slash pickle, but it's not well known. No one really knows about it, even the really experts in fermentation. So that's definitely not just you at all. So.
Thank you for putting me at ease slightly there. I think, and for the benefit, and it'd be good to get a bit about your upbringing, and maybe some of the clues, the reasons why you decided to start the firm. But it'd be quite good just off the bat, just to tick these off for the audience. So kimchi and chi are two different products, although you say they're quite related. Is it right? One of which is related to cauliflower leaves and the other is broccoli stalks. Have I got that right?
Yes. So just to cover my background first. So I'm from Gwangju, South Korea. And Gwangju is actually famous for kimchi, even amongst Koreans. So we have the perfect climate and geographical benefits that create the perfect environment to create kimchi. That means we have access to good quality rice, good quality produce, like radishes, cabbages, and other products that can go into kimchi, but also amazing seafood. So we're a peninsula, but we're on the west coast of Korea, where we have really rich, diverse species living in our ecosystem. So that also creates a good environment. And we also have a harbor nearby called Naju. So all the traders who would come in from all the smaller islands, they would bring in all these fresh resources, and the families here have had access to kind of these resources that created kimchi to begin with. So that's why I think Gwangju is famous for kimchi, and I have grown up there. That's where I was born. My family's lived there for generations, and kimjang has been part of our heritage for millennia. People have been making it for so long, and I've also practiced making kimchi since I was little with my family. So my grandma, aunties, my mom, the whole kind of neighborhood would come together and pick a day during winter season and just make kilos and kilos of kimchi. And it would be a whole collective ritual where all the neighborhood comes together and we feed our families, and the preserve would last the whole year. So that's how we would survive the cold winters. So that's how kimchi was kind of born and practiced. So I love the practice of it. I never would get sick of it. So that's one of the reasons why I chose it as a business as well. For my professional background, I come from a creative background, so I was a designer. That's what I studied during my bachelor's, and then I came to London to study design for social innovation and sustainable futures in my master's. And during that master's, I was able to focus on food insecurity, food sovereignty, food waste. And my research that was based in London, based in UK, kind of created the nice solid ground for me to stand up on, because that's where all the network had been already built at that point, and all of my data that I've collected was also based in the UK as well. And I decided to marry my research and my heritage and create the firm, which is a vegan zero waste fermentary.
So you say growing up, kimchi was very much at the centerpiece of your family and community. Was that like? 'Cause, I mean, what I'm trying to gauge is, were there other products or other foods or drinks that were also at the center, or was that clearly the standout delicacy that your family and community really valued and bonded you together? Because what I'm trying to get at here is, and it's always a risk doing this retrospectively because often there's not necessarily logic to it. But what do you think the reasons are that you wanted to start the firm specifically? You wanted to focus on kimchi. What was that? Just because it was so standout when you were younger? Is it something you just stumbled across later in life again after remembering it from your childhood? Yeah, can you? Is that something that even makes sense, or is it just a bit more random than that?
No, I think what you're trying to understand is what is the emotional connection to kimchi that I have. And that's a really important question, because I live, breathe, and sleep kimchi all the time. There has to be an emotional pull to it. So I have been eating and making kimchi with my family for since I was young, and it's been something that I've always loved. And it's not something that I found later in life. It's always been there. And it's not really a delicacy that we see it as a delicacy. It's just always around. We never have a meal without it. And it's not just one dish either. We have 200 variations of kimchi that we have documented. It
Wow.
has such a rich history behind it as well. Depending on the family recipe geography, depending on the seasonality, we can kimchi anything. So it's more of a method, it's a preservation method, and it's also a very tactile, nurturing practice that I think is almost like a form of care, and meditation in a sense. For me, anyway, it really grounds me when I'm feeling out of control, when I'm studying abroad somewhere else like the US, where I went to study for 7 years, where I'm in London. I've been here for 5.5 years, so I've lived abroad most of my life, and I've also been apart from my family for so long that it's one of the things that really holds me close to them.
Hmm.
So that is a very strong emotional connection there, and I've always been very proud of it, even though I was made fun of the smelly lunch boxes when I was younger, which is a very common story for immigrants, unfortunately. But I've always
Mm,
wanted to create something out of it. And there was the element of anger and frustration of why there are racial biases within our food system that has kind of been rooted in colonialism. And that was the whole focus of my dissertation during my master's as well. The study of how our civilization has built based on supply chain, based on colonialism, and how our cities have been based on trade on goods. So socially, environmentally, food is a huge part of how we operate as a society and as a country as well. And supply chain is so complex, and there's so much human biases that is kind of implemented that has seeped into every level of it that I find it fascinating. So there's no end to how much research that can be done. There's also no end to how much opportunity there is as well. So um, I think that I would also never be sick of eating it or making it, which is why it was such a safe bet to start a kimchi company to begin with. Because when I first started it, the whole reason why I started, I've never really been interested in startups before. I've never really thought of myself as an entrepreneur. Some people want to become an entrepreneur and then find the passion to do something afterwards, whereas it was the other way for me. I've always been passionate about food. I've always been passionate about kimchi and fermentation, and I wanted to stay in London after my master's. And one of the ways to get visa was a startup visa that my university was endorsing at the time. So I thought, okay, if I'm going to apply for a startup visa just as a backup plan in case I don't get the working visa, I need to have a solid idea. And the idea was to make kimchi out of scraps that I had in the kitchen. And that's how it all started. I was always making kimchi out of little, of cuts that I had during cooking. And I had no idea how to commercialize it, how if it was scalable, if people would even like the idea. I had no idea. It's just something that I did. And I was like, well, I used to make jokes with my friends and say, oh, you should sell this kimchi. That's what they would say. And I was like, oh, yeah, sure. They're not gonna buy my kimchi. And now here I am. That's how it all started.
I was just transported back there when you mentioned that, especially having it out of a lunchbox. Obviously, it has a certain smell. I don't know if you were, but were you originally quite embarrassed to be having kimchi, especially like in a social environment? Did people take the mick of it? Because what I'm trying to see here, which is incredible, is now it's something to be so proud of, and the packaging looks amazing, and the product I'm sure tastes great, and I'm very excited to have it. So it's almost like you've taken something that people used to almost mock to a degree, and now you've almost stuck two fingers up at them and created something just wonderful.
There were moments where I felt embarrassed, even still to this day. If I spend a kitchen and if I spend a day in the kitchen, in the production unit, I will
Mm,
smell like kimchi. And I come home or I go to the next networking event and I apologize for it because it is a very specific smell and I don't mind it, but some people do. But most of the times, I have enough support from my
mm,
friends and family and close people around me, my colleagues who say, don't say sorry. We love the smell. Don't worry about it. I think over time, I've gotten kind of used to having the smell around. But yeah, it's very interesting to see the overall trend of Korea
mm,
arising. I think our government has done an amazing job with the marketing for the last decade. So the rise of K-pop movies and different dramas and fashion and food, all of these things have been such a boom that it's very weird for me to witness in real time because when I first arrived in London 5 years ago, people wouldn't know where Korea is.
mm.
I would have to explain it's between China and Japan. And they're like, all right, I've always wanted to go to Japan. And I'm like, okay, that's really irrelevant to me.
Yeah,
um, that's how the conversations really went. But now people say, oh my gosh, you're Korean. I've always wanted to meet Koreans, or I want to travel to Korea. I love Korean food.
mm.
That's how they kind of relate to it first.
It, can you remember the day that you decided to come up with the idea of the firm, the day that you wanted to start that business? And if so, and if I'd been there in the room with you,
Yeah.
what would I have seen that day?
Oh, that's such a good question. Um, I just finished my master's. I was living in Elfland Castle because it's next to LCC where I went, and I was with my friend Benoli, who did the master's with me, and we were both looking to get the visa at the time. And this was before the 2-year graduate scheme visa has been implemented. We were the year before that. So we were like, well, in a few months, our visa's going to expire. You might have to go home. I might have to go home. What are we going to do? We're going to look for options. Maybe we'll apply to these visas. Let's see how it goes. And we looked at the startup visa and I was like, well, we're like, are we actually going to create a business? What are we going to do if we're going to do a business? And I said, well, like I'm good at making kimchi, like I know that. And she's like, okay, well, let's just apply and see how it goes. And I said, well, I think this sustainability angle is really gonna really help me, and it's gonna give me that boost. I'm gonna highlight the fact that I'm a woman of color and I really need this
Mhm.
opportunity, and that's how the application's all gonna look like. And that's how I wrote it. And I really didn't think that I would get it because it's so competitive, and I just thought it was going to be a backup plan. But I was really lucky because UAL is massive university, and they only give out a handful of visas each round. And I know the people who have applied for it and failed. So I was like, well, couldn't hurt. And I went through the whole application process. And I remember the day I got the email confirmation that they will endorse me, and I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to run a business. I have no idea how to do this. I have no one in my family has done business before, never touched a spreadsheet in my life, did not know what legal entities companies can be, did not know anything about insurance or taxes or anything that has to do with accounting. I just knew I liked kimchi. That's really all it was.
That's so great. I love that. Because I was part of me was like, there's gonna be some like big process behind this, and you would have like you worked out every detail about how to start a company. But I love it. You were doing it backwards. You'd applied to this startup scheme, not thinking that you'd get accepted. The only thing you really had, I suppose you'd sent off the application, but the only thing you really had was the love of kimchi. So yeah, which is
Truly.
like one, it's fantastic you got accepted, even as you say, it's hotly contested. What do you think they saw in you or the application over the others?
Mm, I think because I was so anxious that I wouldn't get the visa and I would have to go back to Korea, that I just pulled out all everything that I've learned. So all of my research that went into food waste, all the stats that I knew about it, all the kind of all the talks and interviews and in meetings and workshops that I've done around food sovereignty and diversity in food industry that we needed. I just pulled all of that out. So I think the whole duration of masters, all the units that I've done have been kind of reduced into the application process. And I've also spoken to my family, my grandma, my aunties, and my mom about kimchi for so long. I've always just, looked at what they're making. So I knew by heart that this is a great product. It's a difficult and laborious process, but it's something that doesn't exist here that I'm always missing. So I knew there was a gap. So I think when they were interviewing me, they knew that somehow I was in the middle ground of the research and the heritage that is what the firm is. So I was a perfect person for it. And I had the communication skills, I think, during the interview to really show my passion. And sometimes those skills don't align. Some founders, they have the passion, they know all the lingo of their tech or whatever their idea or product can be, but they don't have the communication skills as the wording that can really provide to showcase it. Whereas I think I really like talking. I teach a lot as well, so I had the skill sets to really talk about it. I think that was the biggest thing. But I know now that entrepreneurship is not just about talking to people in the room. It has so much to do with strategy and numbers as well, which that is my weakness. So that's what I'm learning now.
Incubator program,
Yes.
feeding the city by Impact
Mhm.
Hub, King's Cross.
Yeah, so that was the first program I've ever done. So I've done 4 incubator/accelerator programs until now, so that within the last 2 years. And Impact Up King's Cross was the first one to accept me in that journey. And this is very early stages. So for people who either have an idea and they don't know how to start something out of it, or they want to do a startup, but they don't know
Mm.
what idea that they want to have. And so they provide the right environments, the right workshops, and the network and support to go from each step to creating something legitimate. And when I say legitimate, like a legal entity. So they helped me research which legal entity I wanted to be, which insurances I needed, what kind of cash flow I needed to set up to begin with. Um, what the marketing strategy has to look like, what the tone of voice of my branding has to be. Marketing came quite intuitively because I worked in design, whereas the cash flow and the legal stuff really was something that I struggled with. But the team was very supportive. They would say, "Okay, we know this copywriter. How about you talk to them about what kind of tone of voice you would like to have?" They set me up with multiple mentors, and they all worked in the food industry, so that helped immensely. I still, see them from time to time to this day. So um, that's been an immense help to begin with. And after that incubator program, I've done Carbon 13 Accelerator Program. They're based in Cambridge, and Carbon 13 is a climate tech accelerator program. So mine is not tech. So I came in with the firm's idea, and it's an FMCG. So I was surprised to be accepted, but to be a part of that program, I always think of it as a mini MBA because all the people who were in that cohort were extremely
Mm.
experienced, like 25 years in this industry and 9 years in Google and have been founders for, like 4 or 5 times now. So all these people in the room, the questions they asked about my business, um, what kind of skill sets I have, all of this I did not know at the time because I was just going from work to home and I didn't really know where I stood or my business stood in the industry, what kind of scale I should be looking at. So they gave me that perspective and also how to talk about cap
Mm.
tables and negotiate as well. So that was a immense one. So an incubator program kind of set the tone, I think, because I've been exposed to that before. I think Carbon 13 didn't seem as daunting. Still was, but I think it definitely helped. And then after that, I did another program called 2020 Levels, and then after that, now I'm part of Startup Discovery School, and their program for female founders is the one that I'm part of. So I think once I did the first one, I realized, okay, this is how I can structure my time to get the benefits that I need out of this program. And this is how I network within it. This is how much time I should dedicate. And um, that's kind of how I learned each time. And all of those programs are free, and they've been so helpful in the whole journey. So I really encourage other founders to look into other accelerator and incubator
Yeah,
programs
the
as well.
first one especially, send me the, I mean, I could probably find it, but I'll put the details of that in the show notes because I think that would be so helpful to future founders. Did you get, so you, I'm trying to work out the relationship between the startup visa and the feeding the city incubator program, Impact Hub at King's Cross. Was there any connection there?
Mhm.
And if not, did you get a grant from um, the startup application that you were successful with, or did you get a grant from the next incubator? I'm just trying to understand, and it's a bit of an awkward conversation as always, but lots of people, one of the big blockers for them wanting to start a business is the cash side. So yeah, I was just trying to understand, did you have bit of money saved up? Did you get some from the application or the first incubator?
So the application itself,
Yeah.
no. So they just give the endorsement letter, and the government gives you the right to reside in the UK. So there's no money at all. And startup visa allows you to have a second job, so you can support yourself by having second jobs. And I did do some freelancing during that time to support myself. So that's been very helpful. And then I switched up to Innovators visa, which is when I have now, and legally I'm not allowed to have a second job. So that's a huge yeah, that's a struggle that other founders probably don't face. But I'm lucky I did have some savings, and I did win a grant as well, or
Mm.
two grants now. So one is from Innovate UK, and that one's called Young Innovators Award. So I won that. And the second grant is from London, which is under Mayor of London branch. And I also won some pitch competitions here and there that kind of gave me a few couple of
Mm.
Ks to sustain myself. So that's kind of how I've been living it. But also I teach classes and workshops as well, and a lot of corporate get in touch with me to do some workshops. So that's been very helpful. But the incubator program, Feeding the City, didn't was not grant funded at all. So it's free. So the network and the expertise that you get from it is what the benefit is. Same with 2020 levels, and 2020 levels did have a pop pitch competition at the end where you can win, I think, 2K at the time. 13 Carbon 13. The only phase one is there's no money for that. But if you find a co-founder and start a startup, and then you go to phase two and you win the competition there, then they give you, I think it was 45K. So I can't remember the exact number, but there was some funding opportunity afterwards. But Carbon 13 will have equity, and then they will also support you raise the next round of funds through their VC network. So that was how Carbon 13 worked. So it depends on the incubator program, accelerator programs. Some incubators actually pay you to survive, to sustain yourself during the duration of the program itself. So it depends on which one you're looking at. But that's how I've been kind of sustaining. It's tight. It's not easy, but I've gotten very good at being
Yeah,
frugal.
that's actually so funny you say that. I think, look, it's always nice to have lots of funds behind you, I'm sure. But there is something to be said for, okay, you're having enough capital to actually realize what you want to do, but also at the same time not having so much that you end up just spending money on silly things and you don't really understand the value of money. I had a founder on the other day. I haven't released the episode yet, but he has a spicy sauce brand, and yeah, he's like obsessed with saving money and not being overcapitalized. And there's something to be said from that. You really do value each thing you put your money into, and you want to make sure you get the most of it. So there's that. The downside is you don't. It's probably things you can't do straight away, but it gives you a lot of discipline.
Yes, I think being a founder is a lifestyle. You're constantly
Mm.
underpaid, if you're paid at all, and overworked. You don't have really boundaries in your personal life. Work would always leak into your life as well. But also how to strategize, how to really look at what is the value of things. But also it did kind of put me in this transactional mindset. So even with my time, I will be like, well, what can you provide for me? What is a benefit for me if I do this? Whereas sometimes life doesn't work that way, and there are value in things that you might not see, and you lose that flexibility because you're so close to burnout, or because you're trying to sustain yourself. There's pros and cons, I would say, but hopefully for founders, they reach a point where it becomes beneficial and easy, and you learn to prioritize.
The thing getting you through, I mean, going back about a minute from where we are now, but obviously you paint quite a brutal picture of it's really difficult. You're not going to be paid much. It's long hours, weekends. The only thing,
Mhm.
or the main thing getting you through is the love for the product. The love for the product. And without that, it's very difficult to carry on. I just want to go to the second point that you highlighted in the first 100 days, renting your first studio, and you did this through your network. And I hear all the time that network is so important, and I obviously agree, but I'm playing as devil's advocate. How did you get your studio from someone in your network? Did you reach out to loads of people, get rejected a lot, or did you just know someone offering this? How does it work?
So I reached out to all the community hubs, gardens, councils, like just restaurants, just cold calling
Mm,
people. That's what I've been doing, and trying to look for a dark kitchen in London is very expensive. And this is right after COVID, so people were becoming very conservative, and a lot of landlords who used to have tenants who worked in the food business have been burned by tenants just leaving without paying, or just going under, and all of these issues were arising. So people were very close-minded at the time. But how I found the studio, so Mr. Lion's studio is a big name in the mixology world, and Ryan, who is the kind of headquarter boss, um, has been around for decades, and he does a lot of teaching as well, goes around the world. I knew of him and Mr. Lion Studio because of social media, because I've always just been interested in food, and I follow celebrity chefs, and he is a celebrity mixologist. So I live around the area of the studio that I found, and I walked by and I looked at it and I was like, I feel like I've seen this before. Where did I see it? And I realized this was Ryan, and I got in touch. I looked at the Google Maps, and it said that they used to be a restaurant slash bar called White Lion, and they were temporarily closed after COVID. So I got in touch and I said, "Do you have a kitchen there that is not being used? I can pay rent just for a couple months. I would love to rent it from you guys." Just cold emailing. I also said I'm a huge fan of what you guys do. And I got an email back from Peter, who was the building manager, or yeah, part of the Mr. Lion team. And Peter said, sure, why not? You can come for a viewing if you'd like. So I brought all of my jars of different ferments that I had. And I was like, try this, try this. This is this flavor. This is what my grandma made. And this is what I'm trying to do. And I think they just liked me as a person. They knew that we would get along, secondary to the business idea and what I was trying to do as well. So after that, they were like, okay, why don't we start with a 3-month contract and see how it goes? So that's what we started off of. And it is a very small kitchen, so it's not made for, a proper industrialized production space. It's just it fits about 2 to 3 people. It's a size for a small bar restaurant to make some food and drinks. So, but it was the perfect place to start with because I had so many amazing inspiration around me. So all these amazing famous bartenders came about, and Johnny Drain, who is a big name in the fermenting world, he was also making his new product for his startup as well there. So they had all these flavors, and they were like, putting it into cups and measuring things and experimenting. So when I was trying to do the recipe development for my products, it was such a good environment to bounce ideas off of, for them to taste it and give me notes. So we really bonded over the love of food and flavors. And I still have a really good connection with them to this day. So that's how I started, and the people who were there also have amazing networks in the industry. So through them, I've been able to get in touch with some great people as well. So yeah, that's how it all started. But after 2 years, it actually ended up becoming 2 years that I've been renting from them, which is far longer than I intended. And I was lucky to have that space for that long. Um, but at the end, towards the end, I was like, it was exploding. It was just kimchi coming out of my ears. And we're like, okay, we need to move. So we did end up moving to a different space now. But I'm so eternally grateful for them to put up with all of the boxes and jars of different things fermenting.
I think from the outside, it's really tempting to think that it all worked out, and God, you're lucky to have found the Leon studio. But in reality, you were cold calling, cold emailing, reaching out to lots and lots of people. I'm sure 99% plus said no, or a huge proportion. And so the like anything, and we will hear it all the time, but if you really do want to make that next step, and you have a goal, and that goal is to get a studio, and the way to do it, you really just do have to try all of your options, and it isn't just going to fall into your lap. And that's the approach that you took. You didn't get the yes straight away, but so it isn't really like, it sounds like, oh, it's luck because you got such a good deal, and it sounds great, and there are other founders in there and you can learn from each other, but you would have got nowhere near there if you hadn't persevered through like tons of no's over email, over phone. So that's a credit to you, Rebecca.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think that's one thing that I've learned. When I first began, I was like, oh no, I don't want to bother
Mm.
them. I don't want to email
So,
them again. And now my whole day is about
yeah,
chasing people and following up emails and calls. You just need to be really persistent, and you learn to be that way. And that's how you become a salesperson as well, which is a hard one to learn, especially if you're very careful around people's boundaries. So but yeah, I think you do have to just persevere through all the no's. Then there's always an option. Even if Mr. Lion Studio had said no, I think I would have eventually found somewhere else. So there's always options. I'm always optimistic. Even if it becomes not ideal, you can make solutions out of it. So I think you just have to keep going.
love that. I don't think you ever really understand the value of that until you do it yourself. I used to think, I have a similar thing with the podcast, by the way. So, you email people and people won't reply, etc. But you always told, yeah, be persistent, blah, blah, blah. But actually, that is objectively true, but you never really understand the value of that until you've seen it pay off from yourself. I always think that you can hear, and this is a slight put down for the episode, I suppose, because obviously we're just saying be persistent, but really do try it and you will see the results, even if it's a 1% yes rate, which is roughly what a lot of people face in a lot of circumstances. Like, just speak to 100 people and someone's going to say yes. That's what you only need, one yes. You only need one studio when you're
Yeah,
starting.
exactly. So I think one of the biggest struggles when I first began was also looking for the
Mm.
right partner. So catering companies and restaurants that I work with now, it took me a couple of months to find them. So, and that was also through networking as well. So I was just speaking to loads of chefs, um, people who were sustainability managers for certain brands, asking them to refer me to their network. And I just had a spreadsheet of all these people's names and the referrals that they gave me, chasing them and following up with different links, and taking notes and just going back on them and say, who was that person that they mentioned? Maybe I should ask them again. And most
Mm.
times people do want to help, and you just have to be very clear about what you need from them, because they're all busy and they just want to give you the solution and then get back to what they're doing. So if you make it clear and easy for them to help you, most times they will say yes. So that's kind of what I've learned, is that you don't actually need all the fluff to kind of convince someone. It's just, it wouldn't hurt. Make it efficient for you and for them as well. So that's a huge learning that I still learn
Yeah, I
to
mean,
this
that's
day.
in the category of asymmetric risk, and that means where the downside of something versus the upside is just hugely weighted to the upside. So if you ask someone for something or some advice, the downside is, well, it's not really a downside, but they say no. I mean, you could argue being rejected is a good thing because you get numb to it and you just ask more. But the downside, you could say, is no and some, like, a very small amount of embarrassment. Um, but the upside is huge if they say yes. And so you can always look at it from that lens of, what's the worst that's going to happen? But the best thing that can happen is just so much faster. With the OXO tower, and you mentioned that in your first 100 days, and this is in the context of getting cauliflower leaves and broccoli stalks. We mentioned those earlier for your kimchi and zhongjushi, pronounced that awfully. Was that an example of asking around and trying to get that supply, or was that the first person or first company you encountered?
So they were the first people to say, okay, let's
Mm.
try this. So they gave me, I believe the first donation was about 9 to 10 kilogram, and I carried it myself. in a little trolley to the kitchen. And I remember just like getting on the bus with my massive bag of cauliflower leaves and being like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is my life. I'm just carrying bags of cauliflower leaves. And I used to also chop it by hand, make
Yeah.
everything by hand at that point. Now we use a chopping machine. But chopping 9 kilos is no easy feat. It's a lot of chopping. So even that, so when we first tried it with Oxo Tower, they were initially thinking about putting it back into their menu, but they didn't find that viable because I was just a person. There was no team behind me, and I had no logistics experience either. I went back to them a year later at the trial, and at that point, I have already been working with
Mm.
Fooditude, which is a catering company that I still work with to this day. So when I went back to them, they were like, "Okay, let's do this." So they now regularly provide me with cauliflower leaf kimchi, and I've also learned to diversify my supply chain and have multiple suppliers so that's when someone says, actually, this month we're not going to use cauliflower in our menu anymore. So you'll just kind of have to skip us. Then I have a different supplier to fall back on. So these are the kind of learnings that I did learned through the first initial trial with Oxo Tower. But I really appreciate the chefs who are so busy and they have a million things to do on their minds, different timings and people and staff and all these things happening in their minds. But they were like, okay, let's give it a try. So restaurants, they usually pay for their waste to be
Mm.
collected from the council. So it's by weight. So it does help to a certain degree. But if you're a high end luxury restaurant, that really isn't a biggest issue. It's more of the fact that they genuinely want to
Mm.
help small businesses, and if it's a good cause,
Yeah,
why
I
not?
the lesson I'm taking away there is it doesn't have to be cauliflower leaves or broccoli stalks. Obviously, in your example, it was, but you can almost think every company is going to have some residue or product that they don't use or throw out or can't use for whatever reason. Plugging another podcast, although his podcast is obviously bigger than mine. But Diver CEO Stephen Bartlett gave a really good example when he was starting out in this first business. He wanted to film some content or a campaign. He was in the marketing industry, and cameras are very expensive, as we know, and there's all the equipment around it. He had no money. So what he did is he spoke to, I think he emailed Sony or Panasonic and said, look, you get a load of returns for cameras that you obviously can't resell for whatever reason. They still work. You have a load of returns. You can't do anything with these. Please, could I at least rent them from you for free? And I'll give you a plug or shout out. And it's akin to your story in a way, because it's understanding, okay, they have a need in a way. They have all this spare supply. They can't use it in any way. Can I utilize it? And so everyone kind of wins.
Yeah, exactly. It's thinking
Yeah.
outside of the box. Is there a solution to this? I think that that's what I've learned from my mentors as well.
Yeah.
I have this issue, and this is a block in my current operation. And then they think of something that I didn't even think I could ask. So I think that's the entrepreneurship skills that everyone talks about. It's the fact that you can just ask. There's one thing that you can do is just ask. So the worst is the no.
So true.
So yeah, definitely what you talked about is the value you can provide for them. So you can be empathetic and think what is their pain points, and then use that to leverage your negotiations. And they are negotiations. We negotiate every day
Mm.
with these tiny little choices. So yeah, definitely a good skill set to
So
have.
great. And it's difficult because we don't automatically think like this, but putting yourself in their shoes. I mean, again, it's not the first person to say it. We're not the first people to say it, but really, especially when you're emailing something and asking something from them, trying to solve a problem they have as well as a problem you have yeah, is clearly the way to go. I even like the example you gave earlier where your other job. So it's good to have a bit of finance on the side to get you through maybe the bills. That could be other people's situation, but you've almost merged the two things together. They're complementary of each other. So you're the firm along with the workshops you do that is to do with kimchi. There's obviously a relationship between the two. So that's also a good thing to think about if you are going to you do want to keep your job or have money on the side. Having a job that complements what you're doing is also super helpful. I just want to go into the final 2 points, and usually I just jump in and read it out, and then you sort of have to go for it. But I'm not quite sure what came first, so I'm going to let you decide this one. So we've got starting a farmer's market, customer research, practicing sales, and then designing the branding, photography, and website, reflecting on the personal ethos. So which one came first before the other? And yeah, I'll just hand it over to you. I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, sure. So I came from a design background, so I did the branding, photography, everything myself, even the illustration. So I think that definitely came first, but I kept refining it as I went on. So it wasn't like I stopped it and then farmers markets came in. So the branding, photography, and website was such
Mm.
a good way to exercise creativity. It made the project way more fun because I had to figure out all the numbers side on along the side as well. So I yeah, that's the first beginning part that I think I'm still quite proud of. I'm actually rebranding soon with a team, so I will let go of my first version of the firm. It's still very dear to my heart. I just wanted to change up the things a little bit so that it's better on the
And
shelf.
sorry
But
to
that
jump
was the
in,
first
but
beginning.
branding, the photography, and the website, did you do yourself, or did you get someone
I
amazing?
did.
And just a little bit of I suppose detail would be interesting, but how did you do the branding and how did you create the website and that as practical as possible? So were you just drawing out designs and then doing the design yourself electronically and then also with the website? How did that work?
Yeah, I remember drawing it just with
Okay.
a pen and a paper, and then scanning it in. That was the kind of beginning parts of it. I also was creating a digital cookbook for my master's. That was my final project that I submitted. So I had a little bit of experience putting designs together with food context. So I brought that in, and I also did an internship as a brand strategist with Shift Design. Shift Design is used to be I think they closed now, but they're a design agency, and that's also set up as a charity. And they hired me as a brand strategist for one of their food ventures. So I saw how they created the workshops to kind of look at the brand messaging, how to look at the hierarchy of it, so I kind of implemented what I've learned from them as well. So I knew that I wanted it to look very Korean, very artisan, and something that reflected me as well. So that's what I'm talking about, the ethos of it, and I really wanted to highlight the zero waste aspect. But now that I'm rebranding, we've kind of restructured the highlights. So I realized that the zero waste aspect is more of a cherry on top rather than the key message itself. So the key message has to be the Korean authenticity aspect and the health benefit. And then the zero waste aspect has to come after that. So that's the customer research that I'm continuing to this day, and one of the ways to do it is the farmers market. So I started farmers market. That was the first channel, the distribution channel that I started, and I tested out so many different farmers markets all over London. And I was looking at the area,
Mm.
the different types of audiences, and how to talk to them. And it's direct customer feedback, so I can tell from their faces, little body gestures, and body language that they didn't like certain parts of the sales. So if I'm talking about one subject, I can read their response. If they taste it, if it's the design, if it's for themselves, if it's for something else, someone else as a gift. Um, and so that's kind of how I learned, is that this design works, this jar works, this color of lid. Um, when I talk about my family recipe, people really kind of light up. So how what kind of messaging I need to highlight depending on that. So it was kind of it tied together, the farmers market, the research, and the branding, because I kept refining it as I went on, and I still am with my rebrand team now. So we look at the size of different things, how absorbable the information should be, how easy to digest it should be. So those two things during the first 2 years of the company has been so crucial, and I think it's still things that big brands spend loads of money
Mm.
on as well. So It's something to pay.
No one knows the designers as well as you. No one cares about the designers as well as you. So yes, you can work with a marketing branding agency, but ultimately it should be you that has the input. You're the one that understands the ethos. You have all the background around why you started the firm. We've gone through that at the beginning. It's quite an emotional journey all the way from early childhood, and you've decided to pick it up, and it coincides with getting that grant from the government for a visa. So yeah, you're placed in a prime position to be able to reflect that in branding. Something that you said though that was quite unique, and I know maybe we have spoken about it on a previous episode. I can't remember. I don't think we have, but often at farmers markets, people will say, "Well, Joe blogs or Jane said that the product was not great and they were really obvious about it or they really loved it." But what you did that was different is you were trying to pick up on people's body language and not necessarily what they were saying directly, but the way they were giving cues around certain parts of the product. Is that something that
Mhm.
you've learned to do over time to understand how people are really feeling, maybe slightly disconnected with what they're saying? Because that's such a good skill to have, because that gives you just so much more information about their experience. Because people are quite polite a lot of the time. They don't necessarily tell you if they hate it or well, if they hate it for sure.
um, I think the biggest indicator is the sale itself. So obviously you have to look at the
Yeah.
money and see what products sell. But other than that, the body language observation skills I think is quite particular for women.
Mm.
So we're very good at reading different emotional, gestures and things like this. I think I'm not saying that men aren't. I have friends who are amazing at it as well, better than I am. But I did learn to kind of use it to my advantage during sales. So I've had people who are very obvious. I've had people spit it out in front of me after they had the sample tasting. And honestly, when I have reactions like that, I don't really get like offended. From my perspective, I'm just kind of like, oh, that there's something wrong with you because it is like delicious to me.
You're the problem.
So it's just like, okay, interesting. This is a very outlier data that I can disregard. um, but I also do ask them like, what is it because you don't like tanginess? Is it because you're not used to having fermented foods? Do you usually have a lot of processed sugary things? Maybe when you're used to a certain palate. Do you have mostly European cuisine? Like there could be so many aspects to it, and there's also the emotional aspect to it. So I've met a lot of men who love eating meat because that is also tied to masculinity. There's also a religious aspect to it. There's an ageist aspect to it, and like I mentioned before, kimchi being the kind of worldly culture, emotional nuance that I think that's also an interesting part of it as well. So there's so much behavioral kind of elements, and I've learned to kind of read it so that I can nudge as well during my sales pitch. But yeah, it's very, you learn from it for sure if you spend every weekend doing farmers market. And I love it because you just learn and absorb so much, and you're also outdoors just looking at dogs and kids, and it's just a nice time. And there's a lot of return customers, and you learn their names and you see their kids grow up and such. So um, I really think this part of it is something that I won't let go of for a long time until I really, really can't do it anymore.
It's rare. I think I'm just trying to think back. I probably had maybe one other person. I've had, I think, 32 guests, but one other person that was just super obsessed with the product. And obviously, lots of guests are, some entrepreneurs, we've already spoken about this, will be working backwards and saying, okay, what problem can I solve? I'm sort of agnostic as to whether I inherently care about the product or not. I'm just a problem solver. But then there's other types of entrepreneurs
Mhm.
like yourself that work the other way and you're already obsessed about the product, and then it's working out, well, can we make a business around this, and is there a problem, and if
Mhm.
there's not, I'll try and just wish it into existence and work really hard to do so. And there's one other guy I've had that was really into olive oil, and his product is amazing as well.
Oh, is this is this the
Yeah,
sommelier?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, I like his product. I've seen him
Oh
around. I met
wow.
him as well. Yeah.
Um, it's funny.
Yeah.
What it's like I'm bumbling to this point, and it is. I just think it's your lucky is the wrong word, but it's just so cool to just be really into one thing and just be and believe it so much and become the expert on it. And not only that, that you're just willing to do it for as long as possible, and you're just like, I could do this for such a long time or forever. I just think that's an amazing thing because so few people um so few people have that, like so few.
Do you know what? I have to admit, I do think about
Yeah.
quitting all the time. It is not easy. And if I did have the option to have a different job, different visa, then I might not have lasted this long. But because my circumstance forces me to continue with my business until my visa runs out, because my worth as a human being to reside in the UK is tied to the economic output
Mm,
that my company will have. It's just circumstantial, I think, mostly. But I do have the passion for it, and at some point, I do feel like I'm delusional, and I'm the only one who cares about it this much. But then there's also the kind of stats to back it up. So one of the reports that I read said that the market size for kimchi is valued to be around 5,000 million by US dollars by 2030. So, there is sizable demand, and there's Korean companies, big corporations coming in to create factories here in the UK and other parts of the Europe to create kimchi and other fermented products. So, they have the data to back up as well that there is demand here. So I don't think I'm being that delusional. You need a little bit of being delusional to be a founder and to continue going for sure. Because you need the confidence, you need the drive, but the numbers also back it up as well. So hopefully, it won't be long until everybody is obsessed with kimchi as much
love
as
it.
I am.
But I think thank you for sharing that though about, yeah, that's always the risk, isn't it, that we make it sound really glossy and it all has fit together and it's perfect, from those 5 points around the incubator program, renting a store, the marketing, the photography, the farmers markets, the Oxo Tower, to get all the ingredients, and it sounds great, and you have the application approved, and it all makes sense because of your child, and all that stuff is so important. But yeah, it is really hard, and you've alluded to that, and you've just reflected that you do feel like you want to quit from time to time or every other day when it gets difficult, and I think that is just normal, and I'm sure every guest I've had on probably has those feelings, and that's quite normal to have. And it's quite important to mention that because I think people, when they start a business, they may think they're the only ones thinking that, and everyone else is just killing it, and like it's all really easy, but clearly not.
Yeah, I think another really helpful thing for me was to create a network of
Mm,
founders. Just it doesn't need to be big. I'm in a lot of group chats and I look at all the kind of struggles that founders go through day to day. But just having a couple of them close to you and talking about different things that affect them, you learn that everyone is just hustling. They're losing sleep over different issues, and they're all kind of a couple of weeks, until they're bankrupt. So it's all about kind of really pushing yourself and like floating. And I realized that, oh wow, like, I saw your business from the outside and you're achieving all these things. It looks so clean and like you're scoring, but internally you're also really struggling, and it makes you feel not alone, and I feel so much empathy towards them, and you kind of learn to support each other. So having that couple of people that you're close with, you can share issues with, that's a huge kind of asset, I think, as a founder. Even if you do end up exiting or going bankrupt at some point, they will know that you have tried everything. So if you have LinkedIn and all these like different fancy things, at the end of the day, it's all about your mental health.
Mm.
So having those network definitely has to be one of the priorities that I
I
have.
don't think I could have come up with a better way to have ended this episode than that. So, I mean, Rebecca, before we finish, and I always try and I forget sometimes, to be honest. But is there anything you feel like we haven't spoken about that you wanted to mention, or do you think we've gone through all of the bits that are relevant?
I would like to highlight that I'm just kind of the vessel that brought the knowledge from Korea, and I'm utilizing it to reduce waste here. But I want to highlight that the innovation of kimchi came from the women who
Mm.
were oppressed. The women in my family, other than my mom, all of my aunties didn't really go to university. They had to give up on their education and career to support the male family members. To them, making kimchi or cooking in general, being in the kitchen is a form of oppression. But because they've made that sacrifice and they kind of built their entire lives looking at plants and different harvests and knowing how to cook with it and ferment it, I was able to take their innovation and knowledge and insights and create a business all the way across the world. So, I want to give that honor back to them. I have the privilege to come all the way this way and be that vessel, but I think they're the true innovators who, looked at all these ingredients and said, how do we put it together and make something delicious as kimchi? I think that's genius, that's so creative. So that's the kind of last
Mm.
bit of notes that I want to put out
No,
there.
thank you for that. And Rebecca, it's been a pleasure. I've loved it. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.